Sam Hyde is an American comedian and co founder of a comedy group called Million Dollar Extreme. On their channel called Dollar Extreme, there was a video called On Jewish Antinatalism, White Replacement, and Virtue Signaling, where Sam Hyde is talking about antinatalism. It's a significant channel with more than 52,000 subscribers, and the video itself now has more than 50,000 views. Now, before we go into the video, we should keep in mind that Sam is a comedian, and his comedy is said to be on the border of satire and serious commentary on a given topic. So, whether he's joking in this video or not, I'm not sure. Maybe he was, and I just don't have a good sense of humor. But if he was serious on this, then it needs a response.
Believe it or
That
not.
the antinatalism, I know it's also the antinatalism and the anti-child thing. It is pushed by.
Right off the bat, he's clubbing antinatalism with anti-child. Well, what does anti-child even mean? If anti-child means being against the well-being of existing children, then antinatalism is anything but that. But the confusion seems to come from some sort of imagination of a child already being there and who would desperately want to be born. And by not procreating, we are depriving that child the experience of life that that child so badly needs. This anti-child confusion was also stated by J.D. Vance in one of his interviews during the election campaign. I have a video on it already. I'll include its link in the description. You can check it out if you want.
It is pushed by the hat people. I know that, okay?
Now, this is a bit of a maybe a cultural thing. What does the hat people exactly mean here? Considering the title, I'm guessing it means Jewish people. And if that is really the case, then this has some sort of anti-Semitic racial smell to it.
But it's also the fact that that regular white people embrace it so
Yeah, it's
wholeheartedly.
embarrassing.
It is a white psychological. I guess black people do this too. Black
Yeah.
people. I hate my kid. I've heard
Yeah,
that.
no, I think, yeah.
And they beat their kids way more. But when it is a psychological sickness problem that has to be erased.
So he's talking about beating the kids as if it is similar to not having kids. Beating children harms them in many ways. It harms them physically, it harms them psychologically, and it also might harm them in their future. On the other hand, not having children, not bringing them into this world is saving them from the harms of life. That is the whole point of antinatalism, or at least Bennettarian antinatalism. Also, this obsession of color of people while talking about antinatalism does not make any sense. Antinatalism is not specific to any certain ethnicity. You could argue that fertility rates, populations, birth rates, etc. differ between ethnicities and cultures. You could even argue that morality varies across the cultures if you are some sort of moral relativist. But the arguments for antinatalism have a common grounding in not just all cultures but across all sentient species. That's because suffering is intrinsically bad and a harm irrespective of which culture you are in. To call antinatalism a psychological sickness is just ignorance. Antinatalism is a rich and diverse philosophy which has been talked about and written about since ancient Greeks, Hindus, and Buddhists. Amanda Suknik and Mati Hairi's recent book Antinatalism, Extinction, and the End of Procreative Self-Corruption claims that most of the Western philosophy about the topics of meaning of life or procreation and so on has been a reaction to the underlying antinatalist sentiment. There are plenty of learned philosophers who are antinatalists. There are scores of books, articles, and papers written on this and are being produced even today on this topic. And you don't have to agree with antinatalism necessarily to recognize that antinatalism is not actually a sickness.
I think it came from WASPs too.
WASPs, WASP, stands for White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. It is a term used for white Protestant Americans who are usually well-to-do, financially speaking. The term has a pejorative tone to it sometimes.
I mean, it may have.
It propagated in movies.
I think it's if it's wasps, it might be that it's has something to do with once you reach a level of economic success and like dinks, dual income, no kids, that whole like 80s
Yeah.
Dinks or dual income no kids is more of a child-free lifestyle. These are couples who choose not to have children for their own reasons. That is different from antinatalism, where the reasons to not have children are about suffering of the child itself and the suffering that that child will cause to others. You can be child-free for antinatalist reasons, but you can also be child-free for other reasons like saving money or pursuing some demanding career and so on. Secondly, dink or child-free lifestyle is found across the world in almost all ethnicities and cultures. I get a feeling that Sam is looking at this through a narrow lens of ethnicity, which is not necessary.
The thing that started coming up in the 80s, and also being more, if you're a WASP, you're more susceptible to virtue signaling. And it is like, if you say what virtue signaling is, on one level, it's that it's the same thing as conspicuous consumption. So if you have a lot of money and you want to let people know you have a lot of money, you go buy a Lamborghini, because a Lamborghini, it is obviously a depreciating asset. It's a waste of money. What you're telling people is you have so much that you can afford to throw it away. That's what conspicuous consumption is about. And there's parallels in the animal kingdom of like just mating rituals where you're, I don't know, throwing bananas away, letting bananas rot in a pile to show that you don't need the bananas because you have so many. That's the philosophy behind conspicuous consumption. And virtue signaling is on one level just an extension of that, and it's that you have so much. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like James Dean smoking a cigarette in a leather jacket on a motorcycle. I have so much vitality and so much youth and so much energy that I can afford to live dangerously. I can afford to throw it away by smoking cigarettes. I can afford to throw it away by riding a motorcycle without a helmet.
That's the way I live. I live like 3 lives.
Yeah, exactly. That's another thing. And so then virtue signaling is like, it's the ultimate, because I'm so rich and so secure in my position, and I'm so high above the rabble and the riffraff, and I'm so not a hillbilly, that not only can I afford, forget a Rolls Royce, forget a Lamborghini, forget the cigarettes and the motorcycle, I can afford to throw my culture away.
So Sam's point is people who don't have children are virtue signaling. Virtue signaling is just a manner of showing off your virtues, showing off that you are a good person, which is a superficial way to attain higher social status. It is hard to know whether this accusation of Sam is for child-free people or for antinatalists, because he probably doesn't even understand the difference. So let's see if his description applies to any of the two. Even though fertility rates are decreasing almost all over the world, we are still in a highly pro-natalist society. People have children as a status symbol, as a means to prove their position in society. So if I need validation from society, the best way to get it would be to have a child. That means it is pro-natalists who could be accused of virtue signaling most of the times. On the other hand, a lot of child-free people don't want to have children because they can't afford to, or they just are not into it. There are surveys upon surveys showing this. Not only that, but women especially are under pressure to have children. I have made a video a few weeks ago about how unfertile women are treated in countries like India. These women are ostracized, not invited to social events, kept away from existing children, and are treated as third-class citizens in their own societies. Women in other cultures have also voiced their concerns about how they are pressured to have children. To deny having children in such a society can be an act of rebellion, but not virtue signaling. But what about antinatalists? You can argue that those who decide not to have children for environmental reasons are virtue signaling, but that does not seem to be true either. Because if that was the case, then we would not have heard of climate anxiety. Remember Sam's analogy about feeling secure about your position to assert yourselves. Here's an example of climate anxiety. This chart shows percentage of people in each country who have sometimes, often, or always thought that they should not have children, or had regrets about having children as a result of feeling anxious or distressed about climate change. The survey is of 500 adults in each country, conducted by Nottingham University. Note the words anxious and distress. We hardly associate these terms with feeling super secure. India tops the chart with 74% feeling the climate anxiety, followed by UAE with 64%, Philippines at 53%, Brazil 51%, UK and Germany at 48%, US at 47%, Netherlands 42%, Australia 38%, Nigeria 30%, and Japan 27%. But what about ethical antinatalists? Is their position against procreation to show that they are on some moral high horse than others? Interestingly, this accusation is also put against ethical vegans. There are two main reasons which stand as evidence against this accusation. Most ethical antinatalists want antinatalism to grow. They are for advocating for antinatalism. They want other people to stop having kids as well. Do you think that person who was buying Lamborghini to show off his wealth would want everybody to buy one? If that happens, he would not be able to do his show off and will have to move on to buying something else. Secondly, most antinatalists are also pro-extinctionists. And of those who are not, they at least think that extinction through non-procreation is less bad than an infinite continuation of this cycle of suffering. This does not match with someone who wants to show off their virtues. It is in the interest of the virtue signaler that his subordinates remain subordinate. They should not become his equal, and they should also not vanish away. There's one more important aspect to this. Usually, to signal some virtue, you have to pretend to sacrifice something. For example, donating a small amount of money to brag about it. Let's see what Sam's virtue signaling antinatalist is sacrificing.
I can afford to throw away my genetic, basically everything that my ancestors worked for over 20,000 years of genetic differentiation.
And be Gigi Allen.
I can afford to, like, it doesn't matter to me that we're bringing in replacement levels of people that are genetically not like me. That doesn't matter to me because I'm so secure in my position. I have so much that I can throw it all away. That's what, that's another level psychologically of what's happening with virtue signaling. And it's like also—
Let's stay right there though. Hold on. Who told you that?
That's something that that's put together from watching all these guys, but that's a Stefan Molyneux point.
Okay, Sam, I don't know what guys you have been watching, but you have been watching wrong guys. I had made a video responding to Stephen Molyneux long ago. You can check it out. I'll put the link in the description. But the sacrifices Sam is referring to is a mix of eugenics and appeal to ancestors. I've already debunked this argument that antinatalists are wasting all the hard work that their ancestors have done for thousands of years when responding to Naval Ravikant. But briefly, for most of the time in history, your ancestors' behavior was a reaction to the environment around them and was driven by their biological disposition. It is egotistical to assign a purpose to an ancestor 1000 years ago, like they reproduced so that after 1000 years you could be born. Secondly, even if we assume such a fictional purpose, it does not follow that we should respect that purpose. After all, how many other purposes that our ancestors had do we actually respect? Most of our ancestors were racist, tribals, sexist, child abusers. Many would even have indulged in incest. I can even say that many of my ancestors were castists. The list can go on and on. But the point is, most of us don't respect these attributes and don't respect the purposes that these ancestors had at the time. And we don't think this giving up on these purposes as some kind of a sacrifice to start with. The sacrifice which is a prerequisite for Sam's virtue signaling. His argument about genetic differentiation is even more bizarre. Almost all of our ancestors didn't even know about genes, let alone genetic differentiation. This notional differentiation of us versus them, or there being something so unique in my genes that I should pass them on, is a complete nonsense to put it mildly and dangerous to put it realistically. This is what is eugenics, and it inspired a large part of Nazi ideology.
So that's the equivalent of like, hold on, an academic, right? The behavior of a New England academic is like that.
Well, you remember the Sopranos, when they show the Northern Italian.
Yes.
And they're trying to distance themselves from the lower Italians. That's also what's going on to a degree.
That's just holier than thou.
Yeah.
Living on a teacher's pension, but it's because I didn't have to do anything.
But those people, they really are desperate to show that they're not hillbillies.
Yes.
That they're not rubes. That they're sophisticated.
Again, if that was the case, then antinatalists would have become like Catholic priests or monks who think that they are superior to others for not reproducing and would want others to keep on reproducing to continue their superiority. But that's not happening. Most antinatalists would want everyone to accept antinatalism. They want to normalize antinatalism. As for the child-free folk, they just want to live their own lives without necessarily asserting any superiority.
And I think that the kid hate could also have to do with virtue signaling, where it's like, I'm so secure in my position and I have so much to give away. We can give away our genetic future, and I don't even care about my offspring, kind of thing.
That's fucking crazy.
Now, the kid hate part might be true for some child-free people, although many of them are loving aunts and uncles and school teachers. But it is certainly not true for antinatalism. If anything, antinatalism comes from compassion for children. They wish to prevent children from being harmed by life. And again, I had put a video about why antinatalism is not about hating children, and so had Lawrence. I'll put the links to both in the description.
But the thing about kids is it's like they're the purest connection that we have to like divinity, basically. Like they're ultimate, they are like the ultimate expression of innocence.
That ultimate expression of innocence is actually one of the reasons for antinatalism. Why would you put such an innocent being through this world of suffering when it was not deprived of its pleasures to start with? Why would you gamble with her life with so many risks just for your desires of some notional divinity, and that too without their consent?
And I think that the people who like hate children or resent children, it's basically because they hate and resent life. It's one of the
It is true that most antinatalists think that life is bad, and in that sense, you could say that antinatalists resent life, or at least resent sentient life. That resentment stems from suffering that is contained within each individual life, and that's why they don't want to impose that suffering onto new children. This does not mean that antinatalists don't enjoy pleasures in life. They do, but they also recognize that before being born, there is no one who is deprived of those pleasures. Anyway, so this is what happens when you don't look at the actual arguments of a concept and just look at the ethnicities or other such attributes of people who follow those concepts. Ben Ware is co-director of the Centre for Philosophy at King's College London. He recently wrote a book on Extinction. There was a talk about this by Ben Ware and it is uploaded on YouTube. The talk itself is about 54 minutes long and he talks about many aspects of Extinction and his book in it. But I want to respond to some of the things he says about antinatalism.
So antinatalism is the view that human beings should cease procreating and bring about their own extinction.
Maybe Ben was trying to be brief there, but we should note that this is not the entire truth. One, there are many antinatalists who include other animal species within antinatalism. There are some who think that we should not breed animals for our consumption, or we should not breed animals as pets, and so on. There are also some who apply antinatalism to wild animals too. Consequently, some antinatalists would want other species along with humans to go extinct. On the other hand, there are some who are not necessarily pro-extinctionist, but are still antinatalist. Luca Sapio is one such example.
Why, one might ask? Well, simply put, according to the antinatalist, in any human life, the quantity of pain will always outweigh the quantity of pleasure. And therefore, according to this kind of simple utilitarian calculus, no human life is ever worth the harm of coming into existence in the first place.
Again, this is also not an entire truth. Quality of life is one of the arguments for antinatalism. It is true, some antinatalists indeed think that pain outweighs pleasure in life. But that is not necessary to recognize that existence offers no advantage to non-existence, or that coming into existence is a harm for the one who is coming into existence. For example, David Benatar says in Better Never to Have Been, one of the implications of my argument is that life filled with good and containing only the most minute quantity of bad, a life of utter bliss adulterated only by a pain of single pinprick, is worse than no life at all.
The ecological variant of this antinatalist position says that humans should kill themselves, or at the very least refrain from reproducing themselves for the sake of nature.
I'd be careful with using words like killing. I don't think ecological antinatalism by and large is for extinction through killing.
What's wrong then with this position, and specifically the latter ecological variant of this position? And I'd say, there are many things, but maybe I'll just highlight two here, which specifically concern the politics of sacrifice, which I think is kind of problematic in this particular concept. So first, while antinatalism sounds extremely pessimistic, and that there is of course a clear sense in which the antinatalists are enjoying their pessimism, one might say, I think ultimately it's naively optimistic, in the sense that it still labors under the illusion that human beings can act in order to save nature by sacrificing themselves, failing to see that nature is, in a sense, in fact, completely kind of indifferent. But the key problem here, I think, is that, antinatalism turns out to be something that is kind of radically kind of depoliticizing. So, precisely by its very refusal to name the enemy and its refusal to kind of see any different form of life for human beings that might potentially emerge, it therefore plays into the hands of those very forces that are in fact destroying nature.
I don't really understand this point, but my guess is he's criticizing ecological antinatalism for being complacent with capitalism.
The second criticism that I have of antinatalism, I argue that antinatalism is not kind of concerned with sin, but rather with pursuing what we might call a kind of heroic death, or a right death in a wrong world. But this fantasy turns out, I think, to be narcissistic through and through, and almost a kind of secular version of modern day sainthood, where we get kind of one group of people who can die this kind of sublime and heroic death, while the rest of us have to content ourselves with the mere struggle for survival itself.
So this accusation is similar to the virtue signaling accusation that we saw earlier. I don't think antinatalists are doing antinatalism because they want to die a heroic death. In fact, many antinatalists think that death is also a harm. As Benatar says, life is bad, but so is death. Of course, life is not bad in every way, neither is death bad in every way. However, both life and death are in crucial respects awful. Together, they constitute an existential vice, the wretched grip that enforces our predicament. But maybe what Ben means here is antinatalists derive some kind of meaning to their lives through antinatalism. That would then sound contradictory, because absence of any cosmic significance to our lives is one of the key elements for antinatalism. But the contradiction is resolved when we differentiate between what Benatar has called as terrestrial meaning and cosmic meaning. From a cosmic perspective, our lives are not very meaningful. The universe is indifferent to whether there is life on Earth or not. But from a more limited perspective, we can have some meaning. For example, if we limit our perspective to, say, all humanity, then we can have a lot of purposes to achieve. Helping our fellow humans can provide meaning to our lives. This is what Benatar calls as terrestrial meaning. It's not a contradiction then to derive terrestrial meaning from an act of explaining to others about the lack of cosmic meaning to our lives. Similarly, we can derive meaning by making it our mission to tell others to stop having kids, to stop procreating. There is nothing contradictory here. And it is not narcissistic either. Many people derive meaning from many things, and this is just one of them. This point ties back to virtue signaling. If it were the case that antinatalists are talking about antinatalism just to show off their own virtues, then it would have been narcissistic. But as we saw earlier, that is not really the case. What about ecological antinatalism? Is that narcissism? Maybe death is not to be taken so literally here, but to mean a pursuit of extinction. I am not an ecological antinatalist myself, but I don't think those who are doing it for their own virtues. Yes, they also might still derive meaning by doing ecological antinatalism, but to say that it is narcissism does not add up. 96th and 97th episode of the Exploring Antinatalism podcast was released. First one was the interview of Luca Sapio. Luca is an assistant professor at the University of Turin in Italy and identifies as a mild antinatalist. He is also the translator of David Bennett's The Human Predicament into Italian. One interesting point early on in the video was this difference between antinatalism and anti-procreationism. Antinatalism is a value statement about coming into existence, whereas anti-procreationism is a normative statement about wrongness of procreation. What that means is antinatalism says that it is bad for someone to come into existence, meaning it is bad to be born, for example, whereas anti-procreationism says it is wrong to bring someone into existence. For example, it is wrong to have children. This needs a little more expansion. I think David Bennett has said on multiple occasions that his axiological asymmetry in and of itself does not lead to antinatalist conclusions. Axiological asymmetry just shows that there is harm to the person who is born, but it does not talk about the magnitude of harm that is caused to that person. And so if that harm can be overridden by the benefits to others, then we can't say that bringing that person into existence is wrong. Now, if you're going to call this anti-procreationism instead of antinatalism, then we can say that antinatalism is just about badness of coming into existence instead of wrongness of bringing someone into existence. So even though this contradicts with Bennett's claim, I personally quite like this distinction. Luca includes all sentient animals and not just humans in his antinatalism, but he does not necessarily advocate for extinction. He explains his position by appealing to the possibility of cosmic significance of sentient life on Earth. The mere possibility of such cosmic significance of our life and sentient species in general should make us consider extinction very carefully. And in Luca's opinion, it would be a bad thing because it eliminates any chance of such a possibility being realized. I'm not sure I agree with all that Luca says, but it was still a very interesting conversation. 97th episode was an interview of Ricardo Lopes. Ricardo is the creator and host of the channel The Dissenter. He has over 1,000 video interviews of philosophers on various topics, including antinatalism. Amanda and Ricardo discuss how he produces so much content with such high quality and so fast. Ricardo is a sentiocentric antinatalist, but he does not fully agree with David Bennett's antinatalism. They discuss about his antinatalism and his differences with some arguments for antinatalism like Bennett's axiological asymmetry. A good section of the episode reviews all the interviews Ricardo has done on the topic of antinatalism, and there are so many of them. It was an interesting 1 hour 36 minutes to listen to. There was an article by Konrad Shojic, Humean Sentimentalism, Sentimentalist Antinatalism, and the Metaphysics of Procreation. Humean Sentimentalism here refers to the empathy and compassion that we have towards future generations. On one view, you could say that having such an empathy would mean that we should allow the future generations to experience life. This is based on the premise that life on the whole is valuable and worth experiencing than not coming into existence. However, Conrad argues against this. The same empathy towards future generations can also lead us to antinatalist conclusions. If we consider the fact that future generations would not be deprived of goods of life if they are never brought into existence, then we can easily conclude that it is better for them to not be born given all the suffering that exists in sentient life. But Conrad also mentions one more point. If we all agree to antinatalism, then there would be some last generation at some point in time. This last generation has to decide on the value of continuing human life. Conrad proposes that we still produce next generation, meaning we still have children, and then leave it up to them to decide whether they want to be the last generation or continue humanity. I'm not convinced by this argument. One, it sort of indicates that we ourselves are not convinced fully that existence offers no advantage to non-existence. And two, generations are never discrete. You can't demarcate them saying that from here onwards, this is going to be the next or last generation, etc. The article itself is not not written in a very accessible language, but maybe it is not meant for lay people like me. Anyway, it was only a short article and was a very quick read. Lawrence did a very informative video on Abu al-Mari, who was a 10th century blind vegan antinatalist poet who lived in Syria. The video covers many aspects of al-Mari's personality, his life journey, his poems, his veganism, and of course, his antinatalism. Bengali antinatalists are a group of activists which Sumit started in the state of West Bengal. They did an outreach event with signs and boards of stop having kids in Bengali and in English. As you can see, some quite strong messaging done for antinatalism. From Bengal to Poland, there was a Polish extinctionist demonstration.
Demonstracja ekstynkcjonistyczna. Zakończyć wszelkie cierpienie.
And as far as I know, this is one of the first ones happening in Poland. This happened in Wrocław, Poland, and I don't have their pictures yet, but I'll put the links in description as and when we get them.